Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. Since you can't come down to the grill room during this pandemic, we're bringing the grill room to you. Our guest today is a great family man, sailor, and leader, both on and off the water. Born to Francis and Pierre, he began sailing at the age of 8 after his father, Pierre, finished building their El Toro in the basement of their home in San Francisco. He would go on to win 7 world championships, including in the very competitive International America's Cup class, the Maxi Worlds, and in the Star class. He would participate in 7 America's Cups, including as a trimmer aboard Defender in the 1983 America's Cup, and as a tactician aboard USA in the Golden Gate Challenge, the first challenge for the St. Francis Yacht Club and the first challenge for any yacht club in San Francisco Bay. And he would go on to be skipper for Raul Gardini's El Moro di Venezia, and skipper for Dennis Conner, Stars and Stripes, and ultimately the CEO of the Artemis Challenge in 2013, covering a full 30-year span of America's Cup participation. During that time, he also raced in 2 around the world races, winning the Whitbread, the first American to win the Whitbread around the world race, and taking second in the Volvo around the world race. And in terms of honors, off the water, he was named to the Sailing World Hall of Fame, the U.S. Sailing Hall of Fame, the Rolex Yachtsman of the Year, and he was a 2-time St. Francis Yachtsman of the Year. And he participated in 2 Olympics, basically in Los Angeles and as an alternate, and in Greece as a competitor in the Star class. He's also demonstrated great and growing leadership in his entire career. Back in '85, I was the general manager of the Golden Gate Challenge, and one day I got a call from Tom, and he said, you know, we're going to have an incredibly limited shore crew when we get to Perth, and we're going to have the same guys standing the bottom at evening that were racing the boat during the day. And we got to have a crew chief. You know, it's an unofficial title, but it's a very needed responsibility. And I think Paul Cayard's the right guy. He's kind of young. What do you think? And I said, yeah, I agree with you. He is a natural leader, and definitely I'm the yes on him being the crew chief. Well, Raul Gardini found the same thing to be the case when he was the manager of the El Moro di Venezia program. And, you know, managing this incredibly aggressive set of Maxi and America's Cup programs, and then sailing the boat as well. And as soon as he got on the boat with Dennis Conner, Dennis made him skipper. That's the first time that Dennis has ever yielded the command to somebody else on a boat that Dennis was racing. And Dennis is a very, very savvy sailor. Selected him to be a skipper. And then, of course, during the Artemis Challenge, an incredibly tough effort to be the CEO of, because they suffered the greatest loss that one can have aboard an America's Cup boat in losing a sailor. And it took an incredibly powerful leader with Paul to hold the whole crew together and to basically sail them through those tough waters. And then, of course, after he gets elected to the board of directors of the St. Francis Yacht Club, we make him chairman of the board. And I know he didn't know what he was signing up for when he said yes to that incredible duty, because now with the COVID-19 crisis closing yacht clubs worldwide, he's done an incredibly thoughtful job of leading one of the great clubs in the world through a time when we can't have any sailing or really even any club activities. So I couldn't be more pleased to welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon a great friend, not just to those at the St. Francis Yacht Club who've known him and seen him grow up all these years, but to the rest of the sailing world who treasured him as a great leader. Please welcome our own, the local son of the San Francisco area, the St. Francis Yacht Club, Paul Cayard. Paul, welcome to Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thanks, Ron. It's great to be with you and with all of our fellow members through the virtual Wednesday Yachtsman's Luncheon. Thank you, Ron, for keeping it all going. I'm super proud of all the elements of our club that have done a great job of keeping the club and its activities rolling through COVID-19. And it's my pleasure to be with you today and share some thoughts and talk a little bit about sailing.
Terrific, Paul. Given that you're now the very first sailor inducted into the Sailing Hall of Fame, we thought this would be a great opportunity for you to basically be able to show us a little bit about the young Paul and how you developed into what is in fact the, how you developed into the sailor that you are today.
All right. Yeah, Ron, well, it's an honor to be inducted into the Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame, along with, legends that most of us see on Sunday or on prime time during the week. But more than an honor for me personally, I think it's fantastic for the sport of sailing to be recognized as a primetime sport, an elite sport, and certainly with regard to the Bay Area, a sport that has a lot of participation on our beautiful bay. And we've even hosted the America's Cup, of course. So I'm honored and I'm proud for sailing. So let me just roll right into this a little bit. I'm going to give you and our fans just a quick run through of my history, I guess, and my awareness of sports growing up in the 70s mostly, and why being inducted into the Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame means so much to me personally. I was born in San Francisco, grew up on Twin Peaks. Here's a picture of me in Gold Gate Park in 1964. I wasn't sailing at all, but just it's a picture I cherish because some reason I was right next to a boat. So that might have been my first boating experience.
5-year-old Paul Cayard.
Yeah. Then an important part of my story was that I came into sailing. Nobody in my family sailed. A classmate in the second grade, his parents took him and his siblings over to Lake Merced every maybe 6 months, and they would rent boats from the rec center over there at Lake Merced, some old wooden El Toros with 3-stranded main sheets and Cox cotton sails. And I did that a couple of times, and then my father could see I really liked it, and being the chief of the San Francisco Opera scenic department, he was pretty handy with wood, so he built me a boat in our garage on Twin Peaks in 1968. The number was 6168, and that's the boat there in the picture behind us. This happens to be at the U.S. Sailing Hall of Fame induction in 2011 in San Diego. We were able to find the boat 40 years later, and my father refurbished it as original, and it's now at the U.S. Sailing Hall of Fame Museum in Newport, Rhode Island. This is me sailing another boat. This was a Smith El Toro a little bit later on Lake Merced. So I kind of graduated from Lake Merced to Lake Merced. This jumps to 1979. What's missing is that in 1973, a band of kids named Zandregis, Ken Keefe, Steve Jepson, Joe Horn, took me sailing at St. Francis Yacht Club when I was about 13 or 14 in Club 420s. We had 420s back then, and it was kind of my first venture out onto the bay and my first contact with St. Francis Yacht Club. And through that relationship, there were two very important people, Packy Davis and Don Trask, who nurtured a junior program. I was invited to join the club in 1976 as a junior member. And really that core of Jepson, Cayard, Keefe, Bertrand, and then later Silvestri and Kostecki, we raced all over California and, really bred some great sailors that went on to represent the club all over the world. One of the relationships I made at that time was with Dennis Surtees, who was a great 505 sailor, and he asked me to crew for him for the World Championship in Durban, South Africa in '79, and we finished second place and had a fantastic relationship over the years. I still check in with Dennis every once in a while. He's alive and well, and he was an important person for me. In those days, in the 70s, I was going to high school, now down the peninsula. We had moved down the peninsula, and basketball was my sport. I played from 73 to 77 high school basketball, and I used to subscribe to Sports Illustrated. And I had I don't know what you call it, covering up on the top, a banner of wood up on the top of my bedroom. And I would take out center pictures from Sports Illustrated. And I had Reggie Jackson, Muhammad Ali, Juan Marichal, and maybe Ricky Henderson too. I had a number of athletes that they were my idols. And as we all know, in the 70s, the A's won a few world championships, and Ricky Henderson was a big part of that. The Raiders were famous with Madden and Stabler and Biletnikoff, Lyle Alzado. And so these were all names that I was aware of, and I was participating in this sort of peripheral sport of sailing, which wasn't prime time by any stretch of the imagination, but I loved it, and I had a deep fascination with it. And so in parallel to my, let's say, mainstream sports life, where I played basketball in high school and I had this awareness, I was nurturing my love of sailing. The Warriors were great in 1975. Yeah, Reggie Jackson. This guy was my Rick Barry. And I can still remember the Warriors winning the NBA championship in the Cowpeel. It was right when I was in high school. When I graduated from high school, one of the first things I did is I went to the Laser World Championship in Brazil in 1977, along with John Bertrand, a fellow member of the junior program, and he won the Worlds. And I had a little bit of a mishap, ended up in the hospital and never finished. But John was clearly the best laser sailor around the club and around the world. We hosted the Laser North American Championship that year at St. Francis Yacht Club, I think in August, and I finished third, which was pretty good. But I was already big. I was already a 200-pound kid, and I only spent about 6 months sailing in the lasers, other than the laser slalom. We had a great crew that would race the laser slalom, and I'm thinking this picture right here with Boom, Madrigali, Cayard, Silvestri, Jepsen was after one of the laser slaloms. And that was a classic for sure. Around that same time in 1978, I started a friendship with Tom Blackaller. He asked me to crew for him in the 78 Star North American Championship in Toronto. We did that together. And that was the beginning of a 10-year professional relationship of 2 America's Cups and many other Clipper Cups in Hawaii, sailing Dave Phoenix's Bullfrog, and many other things. And, if I had to just say one person was the most influential on my sailing career, it has to be Tom. When I met Tom, I had talent. I had won the El Toro North Americans. I was a good laser sailor. I was a good crew. But Tom was a great strategist, and he had a tactical mind. And I think crewing for him and listening to his dialogue, but not only that, but when we would race, together, we would come around the Lord Mark, maybe right behind Dennis Conner and right ahead of Lowell North and Bill Buchan or Buddy Melgis, and we would go up the beat trading tacks with those guys, Ding Schoonmaker. And so I was watching their tactics too. And I think one of the biggest, most important keys to my success in sailing was my willingness to crew. Because in crewing, I was able to learn a lot of much faster than I might have otherwise on my own. So I crewed for Surtees in the 505. And 6 months later, I finished 4th in the Star Worlds, 2 completely different types of boats. And Tom was very influential. This is Defender, my first America's Cup in 1983. Kenny Keith was on that boat, and some notable sailors like Rod Davis and Mike Topa, Gary Jobson. We had a great team, but we kind of had a slow boat, and Tom was very frustrated by that. After that, I started to sail the Star. I narrowly missed winning the U.S. Olympic trials in 1984. I lost the trials by a quarter of an Olympic point. Anybody remembers how scoring was back in those days? You used to get 0 for a first and 3 for second and 5.7 for third. It was a very complicated thing. And I lost out to Bill Buchan and Steve Erickson, and Kenny Keefe was sailing with me. We had a great partnership and a lot of fun with the Star, sailing all over the world, got third in the World Championship twice. So I really became my own skipper by following in Tom's footsteps in the Star class. I think Tom and Doug Holm got me into the Star class. I first started sailing the Star crewing for Doug Holm in 77. The U.S. Olympic team, and you can see there, John Bertrand was there, got a silver medal. The Buchan family got 2 golds, one in the Flying Dutchman, one in the Star, and Steve Benjamin's in that picture. Rod Davis and Robbie Haynes and Eddie Trevelyan won the gold in the Soling. I mean, it was nothing but gold and silver on that team. So it was a fantastic experience and, again, formative in my life. I was then hired by North Sail San Diego. Lowell North was running the company still at that time, and I was able to work with Lowell for, I think, 6 or 9 months until he kind of retired. But, you know, what a genius of a guy. He came sailing with us. I sailed Bill Klute's, the Klute family boats, High Noon and Annabelle Lee, and he would come sailing with us, and he gave me huge vouches of confidence, and, you know, he was for a short period of time, he was an influential person in my life too. At the same time, in the mid 80s, of course, and then came Joe Montana, and the 49ers went on to win 4 Super Bowls in that decade. And of course, I was proud. I can remember racing in Australia with St. Francis 7. We were all down there, and the 49ers won their first Super Bowl against, I think, the Bengals in early 1982. It began this whole era of the 49ers, the Catch, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Dwight Clark, eventually Ronnie Lott, you know, a lot of great names. And we all were proud to wear our red and gold when we went sailing too. We all had 49er hats and shirts. And so I was a sailor, but I was quite athletic and very aware. And I envied those heroes. Those were my heroes, just like they were for anyone else. I got fortunate, got introduced to sailing in Italy. Tom sent me to race an Italian boat in the Sardinia Cup in '84. Did very well, got noticed by a bunch of Italians. One of them was a guy named Pasquale Landolfi. I sailed the 1-ton cup on his Brava the next year, and I sailed many years with Landolfi, eventually winning the 1-ton cup in '89 in Naples. I continued with the Star. I won the World Championship in the Star in 1988. And also in 1988, I won the Maxi World Championship. So again, kind of like my early days of crewing, on a 505 to 2nd place in the Worlds, and on a Star to 4th place in the World, right at the top of 2 completely different skill set boats. I won the World Championship in the Star, which is obviously a 2-man, 1-design boat, and the Maxi Worlds, which we had a crew of 30, and it's an 80-foot boat in the same year. So Gardini really, I think I had proven myself. I was only 29, but I had proven myself, and Gardini asked me to do the America's Cup with him. At the time, it wasn't common that you raced for a different country. There were rules associated with it. It was possible to do, but I moved to Italy, and I remember struggling with that decision for quite a while. But here I am at 60 years old, and I can tell you it was absolutely the right decision to make. I'm so grateful for that experience in my life. So being 29 and being in Italy in 1989 with Gardini, you all of a sudden had some very influential friends, King Juan Carlos of Spain, Raul himself, and Gianni Agnelli, basically the Emperor of Italy. They were regulars with us. They would come sailing with us and have dinners with us. And it was, I was just a middle-class kid from San Bruno, really, at that point. And it was quite a lot to absorb. And I would say, fortunately for my French background through my father and being able to speak French, I and having grown up a bit with my grandmother, I had enough culture to hang with this group. We built 5 boats. I was basically running that team at 29 years old. Raul said, here's $100 million, organize me the America's Cup. And I think we did a pretty good job. We lost in the finals to Bill Koch, but along the way, we beat Team New Zealand and Rod Davis and Russell Coutts. So for Italy, for sure, it was a huge achievement. It still is their best score in the America's Cup. We did win 1 race in the finals, and another great experience. I then went and sailed with Dennis Conner in '95. It was the first time that Dennis decided not to skipper the boat himself. He asked me to skipper the boat. We won the U.S. trials. We didn't have a fast boat. In the end, we ended up swapping boats with Young America, and it didn't really matter. Team New Zealand was quite a superior machine, and that was Russell Coutts and Peter Blake. I then the next year got asked to sail around the world, which was something that was a foreign idea to me, but I had started America One. First I said no, but I thought about it hard and I said, okay, hang on a second. Someone's going to pay for me to build a core of my crew, work with my meteorologist, work with my sail designer for the America's Cup in this race. And so we took it on. We decided to do it. I had a lot of my lieutenants from Olympic and America's Cup sailing, and we had an intensity about us that was foreign to that race. We lacked the experience to handle the boat in the Southern Ocean. Namely, I pushed too hard. I pushed the boat just as if it was a daytime race off Honolulu. And when it's the 10th day and it's snowing on deck and it's blowing 45, that's a recipe for disaster. And I got us in a really bad situation on the second leg. Fortunately, no one was seriously hurt. We did break a lot of gear, but we learned a lot from that experience and went on to win the Whitbread Around the World race, which then allowed me to get the support of Hewlett-Packard, Ford Motor Company, SAIC, United Technologies, and a number of other great sponsors that made America One happen. I will say this about my round the world sailing. It also gave me an experience, a life experience, just being out there, being vulnerable, and realizing that you have to rely on yourself and your teammates to come back alive, and then, to try to win the race. So it was a very enriching experience beyond the competitive side. We did manage to win, which was great. It kind of then launched me into a little bit at that point in my career, I was getting some endorsement opportunities, and Rolex was endorsement relationship. I'm very proud of my relationship with Rolex and honored to be part of the Rolex family. We did roll into America One. What I'll say about America One was a fantastic team effort from all the members of the yacht club who made it happen through their support. Obviously, it was Larry Finch, Fritz Jewett, and Tom Sipe that were the lead contributors financially. But it was truly a homegrown effort with Kostecki and myself and Buddha Bob Billingham, and I'm sure I'm going to forget some names, but and then all the members who supported us and came down to New Zealand. We had some fantastic evenings at the base, I can remember. And we did it on $30 million. We lost to Prada, who spent $80 million. We were in the 5th race, in the 9th race of the finals. It was just all fantastic, and great memories, and I'm proud and happy that I was able to do that with St. Francis Yacht Club. Rolling out of that America's Cup, I did help, I was hired by Larry Ellison for a bit to start Oracle, but I rolled into the 2004 Olympics. I put a huge effort into that. I changed my body to do that Olympics. I gained 20 pounds by weightlifting for 15 months, basically, and eating like a horse. We won the U.S. trials easily in a big way. We got 5th at the Olympics, which was a little bit disappointing. We were in the medal hunt most of the week. But again, the Olympics provides you with just an amazing experience beyond the competition. And for sailors, it's an opportunity to mix with the elite athletes of the world. Athens was a very cool venue, and there was a lot of wind. This is the Meltemi wind, the wind that blows off the land. Meet people from obviously all kinds of countries there in the infield. And I think I was fortunate when I look at my Olympic participation to have participated in Los Angeles as an American, and then in Athens again as an American, but the birthplace of the Olympics, and their opening ceremony was also amazing in how they recalled the origins of the Olympic Games. And, you know, I was 24 in Los Angeles and marched in the LA Coliseum with Michael Jordan and Evander Holyfield and Carl Lewis and Edwin Moses as a single man. And I went back 20 years later, and my teenage children were able to be in the stands at the opening ceremony and follow the whole experience. So very few Olympic athletes have the ability, the possibility to go to the Olympics over such a long span. So, you know, really thanks to sailing, I was able to do that. That rolled into Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but it's, all I'll say is, you know, I couldn't say no. Who gets asked to be Captain Jack Sparrow? And there were a lot of things that were difficult. We started super late, but those obstacles had to be overcome. It was too cool of an opportunity to pass up. We finished second, and in some ways it was more satisfying than when we won in 97 because the hurdles, the mountain was steeper. In 97, we should have won. We had 2 boats. We had a lot of time to train. This one was done on a shoestring and done late, and to get second was very satisfying. It was my 3rd trip around Cape Horn. For any sailor, it's just a monumental corner on the planet. It's a rough ocean out there, and you always celebrate rounding the horn successfully. And we celebrated a little bit more that time. The 4 of us here had been around 3 times, and so we had a little cigar to commemorate the moment. And I wanted to give that a little bit of what I said a few minutes ago, the autonomy, the sense of self-reliance, the confidence that you're going to get there. I wanted to give it to my kids. So in 2008, I bought a Santa Cruz 50. It was Bill Leroy's old boat, Staff Commodore Bill Leroy. He's gone with the wind. It was renamed Hula Girl. Great boat, and we had a great experience in the Pac Cup in 2008. There's my little daughter, Allie, who was just out of high school steering the boat, and I'm trimming the kite for her, and Morgan Gutenkoontz is on the handles there, and Ralphie Steets, who was part of America One, is sitting in the foreground. Through all this, I always sailed the Star. It was my, it is my favorite boat. I'll never stop sailing the Star. Hall of Fame. I was inducted in 2011 in the first class of the U.S. Sailing Hall of Fame with Dennis Conner and Ted Turner and Lowell North, Buddy Melgis, just a huge honor. I was the youngest person inducted, and I have to say, I was, you know, I've been fortunate in my career. Maybe I was inducted too soon. I don't know where they drew the line or why I was included, but very, very honored. Artemis 2013 was very difficult, as you all know. We had not a good campaign, and for me, unfortunately, to end my 30-year career with the America's Cup on that note was in my hometown was not fun, not the way I wanted to go out, but you know, sometimes things happen in life and in sport, and you can't control everything. So on to the next, sailed a little bit of TP52 after that. That's a great class. And then I started sailing with my son in the Star. I crewed for Danny in the 2017 Star Worlds. I started sailing super yachts. That's the Maltese Falcon in the background, Tom Perkins' boat, who's a club member, obviously. That boat's been on San Francisco Bay. I'm sailing on Rose Hardy in the foreground, which is a 182-foot Perini. We won the Perini Cup. This picture is Perini Cup 2017. We won that. We're actually cutting the corner on the Maltese Falcon here. Cutting the corner on a 500-ton vessel is very nerve-wracking. But Star Sailors League started in 2013 and still going. Fantastic racing, fantastic format. I think we've done a lot there to bring other sailors, you know, for 70 gold medalists, laser gold medalists. Paul Goodison, two-time Moth World Champion, won the Star Sailors League. And I hope and I know a lot of you are enjoying that. Last year we raced on Lake Garda in the Star Sailors League. They hosted the European Championship, 92 boats on the starting line. Sheer walls, the backdrops were amazing. I got third in that event. Just a heck of a lot of fun. There's something called the Vintage Gold Cup, which is for stars that are 55 years and older, wooden boats. I bought one of my idols, Durwood Knowles, a Bahamian guy, won the Olympic gold in 1964 in this boat. It's called Gem 9. It's built by Skip Etchells at the Old Greenwich Boat Company in 1963. And I race that with my son once a year on Gull Lake, Michigan. Again, just a really fun thing to do in sailing. And for me, being a star, having star in my DNA and in my blood, I love this boat and owning it, and it'll never leave my family. There we are sailing it again. You can see the Olympic rings burnished into the side of the hull in the back. And that's it. I'm still at it. You know, this story started in 1964 in Golden Gate Park in front of a little boat, and it's now 55 years later, and I'm trying to stay fit and racing hard and enjoying it, and I'm giving back a little bit. I am on the U.S. Olympic Sailing Committee. I'm a vice president of the Star Class, and I am currently a director of the board at St. Francis Yacht Club. And I've been blessed, as you can see, and I'm giving some back. I was voted into the 2019 180 members of the Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame. You know, Joe Montana and Johnny Mosley are club members that are already in. So I'm the third St. Francis Yacht Club member who is in the Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame. Just a ton of great names if you want to go to their website and sift through it. The class of 2019 is Bruce Bochy, who was the Giants manager, myself, Natalie Coughlin, who won 11 Olympic medals in swimming, Ricky Henderson, who is the best thief in all of baseball, and Bryant Young, a great defensive end for the 49ers and some of their Super Bowl wins. So again, what can I say? It's almost unbelievable. I do want to, at this point, thank Dave Walker, who's a member of both St. Francis and San Francisco Yacht Club. He's on a board with Carmen Policy, the 49ers legal advisor from the 80s, and they were talking about this, and Dave mentioned, or Carmen said, if we want to get someone in sailing and into the Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame, who would it be? And Dave mentioned me, and that's how this whole thing started. So a shout out to Dave for that. And again, I want to share it with our whole sport, with Dave and, you know, both of our yacht clubs, and Packy Davis and Don Trask, who nurtured us as kids in the junior program at St. Francis, and my teammates Bertrand, Keefe, Jepson, Healy, Silvestri, Kostecki, and all of you, all the members of St. Francis who supported not only me, but all of us through all our sailing. I mean, that's how a story like this gets built, and it belongs to everybody. So thank you all, and it's an honor for me to be included and to be a member of St. Francis Yacht Club.
Great, Paul. Thanks so much. What a great presentation. Holy cow. Local boy makes good kind of story. So tell me, where were you the moment you heard, and how did you learn that you had been selected as the first sailor to be inducted into the Bay Area Sailing Hall of Fame?
I remember it. I was in my car. They had scheduled a call with me 2 days prior, and I had to go to a doctor's appointment over on Temel Vista over there in Corte Madera. And I had pulled into the parking lot, and I jumped on the call with Carmen and Dave Walker, and Carmen told me that I knew I had been nominated, but Carmen officialized it all and told me that I had been inducted along with the other 4 members. And at that point, this was probably in February, and at that point, the induction ceremony was scheduled for May 11th. Which was just a couple of weeks ago. And as we all know, that didn't happen due to COVID. So it's rescheduled to May 3rd, and I'm hoping a lot of members and sailors from San Francisco will be able to attend at the St. Francis Hotel. That's another great coincidence. They do their inductions at the St. Francis Hotel.
For a San Francisco boy who's a member of the St. Francis Yacht Club, that's got to be fun for you.
Yeah.
So now you started sailing on a little El Toro. Did you ever race in the bull ship across the bay?
I never raced in the bull ship across the bay. I mean, we used to have a race called the Flight of the Bulls. I don't know if you remember that. It would be 100 boats racing through the sloughs of Foster City. And I won that one year as a kid, 100. I think there were 100 boats, and we go under bridges and all the way up to the Safeway and back. And there was no wind, but I never, the bull ship race is iconic and classic, and I could still do it. I should do it once.
When's the last time you were in an El Toro? What year?
I have no clue. I don't recall getting in one just even for fun recently. So it may well be 45 years ago.
So now your first international regatta, was that in Durban in the 5.0 Worlds?
The very first international regatta I went to was 1976. Gordon Danielson, a club member, and I went to the Fireball World Championships in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So that was, there was that in 76, 77. I went to Rio. 78, didn't go out much. We had the Star Worlds here in San Francisco. 79, I went to both Durban, and I went to Russia for the pre-Olympics along with Blackaller and John Bertrand from our club and Ed Bennett. We went to the pre-Olympics in 79 in Tallinn, Estonia. And then we all know how the rest of that story went.
So when you were a high school kid, which high school did you go to?
Went to a high school called Crestmore High School in San Bruno.
And what was your position on the basketball team?
Forward. I was a forward. Unfortunately, I was 6'2" when I was 15. So I had very little ball handling skills, and I was good at 15 because I was much bigger than most of the kids. But in my senior year at 6'2", I wasn't impressively tall. I did start both my junior and senior year, but anyway, I tapped out. If I was going to play in college, I needed to be a guard, and I had zero skill.
So what's similar about basketball? What's similar about basketball and sailing?
Well, here's what I say to people who talk about, sports in high school and, why do we put so much emphasis on it? And what I got out of it is it taught me how to compete. And by that, I mean, one, it was a very team sport. So, supporting your teammates, whether you were in or on the bench, and mentally being engaged and not being selfish, that was a huge lesson. But really what it was all about is if you lost a game, you realized what you needed to do. I mean, you had two choices. If you lost a game, you could just slough it off, or you could come back to practice the next day and work really hard on what you didn't do well and try to improve. In those, maybe it's still the same. You'd play one home game. You played every other school twice a year, right? You played one at home, one away. So in the first round, you went to school on the team, and it was very interesting to see the teams that, improved and did better in the second round. And so I give a lot of credit to my high school basketball coaches for instilling in me the desire to, get up when you've been knocked down.
So now your dad, working for the opera, he was a stage craftsman and an amazing, thoughtful guy to build an El Toro for his kid. Do you remember when he was doing it, what you were thinking about, and the whole idea that you'd have a boat that was handcrafted? Talk a little bit about that experience, about being in this little boat as a little kid that your father made.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember going down in the garage. We lived on Mid-Crest Way on Twin Peaks, and it was I think it was the winter he was doing it, and I remember when he first built the jig out of wood, which is just a bunch of frames, to then lay the wood on, and then the boat started to take shape itself, and then he took it off the jig and flipped it over and put the thwart and the centerboard case and the deck on, and I can just remember, I was 8, so it's quite early, but I remember the whole process. I remember it was fun to go down there after dinner and work on the boat a little bit. I guess I helped a little, but obviously my dad built the boat. The boat, my father was trained as a cabinet maker in Paris. That's where his woodworking skills come from. And he went a little elaborate on, the boat was plywood, but the rails were mahogany and the knees were cherry and this was cedar. And, he had 7 different kinds of wood in this little boat. And I mean, it was more like a piece of furniture than a boat. And ultimately, in the end, it weighed a little too much. So I think it weighed 70 pounds, and the minimum weight for an El Toro hull is 60. So that's why, I used it for a few years. It stayed in the family. I think he used it, but I eventually bought minimum weight boats because I was competitive and I wanted to win. So, but what's super cool about the story, sorry, is to have the chance to have that boat come back to us. Peggy Gilmore, who's the class president, found the boat up in the foothills of, in El Dorado County. Somebody had it in their backyard. They had no idea what it was. It had been given to them. It was almost a flower pot. And they were willing to give it back to us. And my dad drove up there in 2012, or no, must have been 2010, got the thing, brought it back. And I think obviously I appreciate it more now, and I appreciate what he did for me and the love he had for me. And in that act, I appreciate all that more now myself as a father. And 8 years old, I thought it was kind of cool, and we were hatching a little baby downstairs in the garage, but I don't think I understood the love and dedication that my father had to me and at that time.
So talk about languages spoken at home. I remember one time in 92 coming to meet you in San Diego about something, and you were speaking to 3 different audiences of press, and you would speak Italian to this audience on the left, and then, I guess it was French to the audience in the middle, and English to the audience on the right. Talk about languages spoken at home.
We almost always spoke English at home. My father, so when I was between the ages of 10 and 14, I spent every summer in France at my grandmother's house in Saint Maxime, and my cousins were there, and I learned to speak French through that experience. And that came in handy when I started being introduced to Italy. Mr. Gardini couldn't speak English, so initially we spoke in French together, and I eventually learned Italian through living there and running that project. So I'm blessed, thanks to my dad again for, introducing me to French, and probably I have a little bit of an aptitude for languages anyway. So I was able to pick those up, and still today I just did one of these video conferences the other day in Italian, and it comes very naturally to me.
So talk about your mom in early sailing.
What I can tell you about my mom was, my mom is the homegrown San Franciscan, 3rd generation, went to Presentation High School, went to Lone Mountain College, which you have to be fairly old, I think, to know about Lone Mountain because it's rolled into USF now. But when they were separate, men and women, and my mother's Bill Russell's age. So Bill Russell was playing at USF when my mom was in college at Lone Mountain. And she was a good-looking woman and vivacious and loved her city. She worked at I-Magnin. She, was, I think, a very San Franciscan young woman who met my father, who was kind of a dashing guy from Paris and couldn't speak any English. And they got together that way. My father worked a lot. So all through my high school, I can remember coming home from school and then needing to go back to basketball practice. My mom would make me a sandwich. She would make me vanilla milkshakes. I was an only child, and I was quite spoiled by my mother for sure. In sailing, my parents bought a snipe partway, probably something like 1972, 1971. They bought it from Emmett Murphy, no less, who was the Commodore of the St. Francis Yacht Club at the time. The sail number of that snipe was 13201. I can still remember it. It was a glass boat with a wood deck. Of course, immediately my dad carved up the deck and made it bigger, made the cockpit bigger. It was easy for him to do. Just get the skill saw out, run it up the deck, and refinish the deck like all in an afternoon. But anyway, they sailed together for a year or two, and it was like divorce court every Sunday night at home, yelling about what my mom did wrong and my mom yelling at my dad. So they parked that thing in the garage for a while. And I think I was about 13, and I said to my mom, let's go sail the snipe. And I can clearly remember one day in particular driving over to the Corinthian Yacht Club. And she drove, and I rigged the thing up in the parking lot. We dropped the thing in. We got our wetsuits on. She had made the lunch. And we went out and won the snipe regatta of the day. It was probably SBRA. Remember that? We used to have
it. Small Boat Racing Association.
Yeah. So we went to the SBRA regatta at Corinthian Yacht Club. And I think we did that a few times. And of course, she loved sailing with me because we did well, and I probably didn't beat on her too hard. And she became the Commodore of the Lake Merced Sailing Club at one point. My father was the port captain. My mother was the Commodore. And, they stuck to it, I'd say, when I really started ramping things up around 1980, 85, they stopped. They stopped sailing on their own. I took them. Sorry.
I was going to say, how was Frances as a crew? How was she?
I think she was fine. I can't remember. I mean, she must have pulled the jib in just fine and put the whisker pole up and down just fine. I can't remember, but.
What did she weigh at that point?
Not much, probably 125 or 130, I guess.
So now, you've had so many successes, and we're here heralding a great one, being the first sailor inducted into the Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame. Talk a little bit about losses. Tell me about some losses.
Well, of course, I never won the America's Cup, and I didn't win an Olympic medal. I think those two things ride on me pretty hard. I mean, I'd like to see myself in that class of people like Russell Coutts, who've won both. So those are my most important losses. I mean, to be in a sport for 50 years, you have more losses than wins. But that's part of competing. You can't win everything. Like last year on my birthday, I was in Italy, and after the first lap of the final race, I was leading the race. I was going to win the SSL European Championship, and we split gates, myself and Robert Scheid. He went to the other gate. He was in second. Next time we came back together, he was ahead. I mean, that's sailing, and it would have been fantastic to beat him on my 60th birthday. It didn't happen, but I'm not counting that as a major loss. I mean, that happens in sport, and it was still an awesome day of sailing, awesome week. But for whatever reason, I think I did invest a lot of time. I spent 30 years doing the America's Cup, 7 campaigns, and it would have been a more fitting end to have won one.
So in '83, as part of the Defender Courageous Syndicate, you guys had broken into 2 teams with Coleus and Bertrand sailing what would have been the sort of stalking horse practice Courageous, the older Courageous. but Pedrick's Defender just didn't seem to go fast enough. Talk a little bit about that experience.
Well, we had courageous. Tom started the campaign with the Heil family, Nick Heil and Jane Heil and Dave Vitor. And I think Dave owned Courageous at the time. So the plan was to kind of form a syndicate. Both boats would race. We would use Courageous in '82 to train. We would build Defender, during that year. And then in '83, when both boats were available, Tom and his team would sail on Defender. And I don't know at what point they decided that Coleus and Bertram would sail the other boat. It wasn't at the outset. And so, it was a good plan. Everything was super unprofessional back in those days. We had the 11 guys on the boat, and Kenny Keefe was one of them, and one person on the shore who was Harry Powell. We had a shore crew of one. And, my job was to bring the lunches down in the morning, for example. And I helped Rod Davis a little bit with the sails. But everybody did everything. Kenny worked on the boat nonstop. We had guys who worked on the winches. Rod Davis and Mike Topa did the sails, of course. So anyway, Defender just wasn't that fast. And we cut the thing twice. And we all had to work on. So when you wanted to modify the boat, you didn't just give it to the boatyard. We had no money. So we went in the boatyard. They cut off the plating. They replated the boat. But as far as rebogging the boat and refairing the boat, that was me, Keefe, Davis, Topa, and so on. We were in there sanding the boat for like 10 days straight, trying to, do the work on the boat. And we did that twice during that summer. So it was arduous work. And unfortunately, it was torturous on the race course. We were slower than both Defender or Courageous and Liberty. And, but then Liberty, it made us feel somewhat, I guess there was some relief in that that Liberty lost anyway. So we would have really lost by a lot if we had gone into the finals against Australia.
Talk about the tough jobs you've had. You've done incredible things. You've accomplished so much.
Well,
share with us what you consider tough jobs.
Well, Artemis was a tough job. Artemis was a tough job because it quickly became very frustrating. We were on the wrong path. Technically, the designer assumed that the boats wouldn't foil. And so the whole concept of the design and the preparation was just against foiling. And meanwhile, the Kiwis were exploring the extreme limits of what a boat like that might be able to do. And they were able to get some practice boats up and foiling. And then they eventually were able to get the 72 up and foiling. And then once that happened, finally, and our designer was pretty stubborn and strong-minded, as they often are. So it took a while. We probably burned another 3 or 4 months convincing him that we had to change, that his plan wasn't right. So that you can imagine trying to tell that to a designer. And it was Juan Kay, who had won the Whitbread already a couple times, probably by that point, the Volvo. So, and we were on the back foot. We were just on the back foot. The boat had structural problems from the get-go. We kept repairing it. Then, of course, we had the disaster with the old boat. Then the new boat came. It had to be modified a lot because of the disaster. And it was a very, very difficult and not fun job. By contrast, I had some other difficult jobs that turned out well. That Disney job was tough. 6 months before the race started, they called me to a meeting in the Rotunda room at Burbank, Disney headquarters, and they said, this is how the t-shirt is going to be, and we would like the sails to have this pirate skull and crossbones thing on the sails. Can you, will you be the skipper? And I said, well, do we have where's the boat? And they said, oh, well, that's why we called you. And there was no designer, there was no nothing. They had the design of the t-shirts, and it takes 8 months to build one of those Volvo 70s, let alone design it, let alone find the builder, get a slot, blah, blah, blah. So we scrambled. We had to use an existing mold. We cut all the design time out and the mold building time, which is 6 weeks, by buying a mold off of Ericsson. And it was just a scramble. but a little bit like America One was also difficult. Not, you know, in El Moro, I had all the money given to me. The guy said, here's $100 million, organize me the America's Cup. So in America One, it wasn't that way either. We had some very tough times with money and trying to plan with the unknown, but both America One and Pirates of the Caribbean were very satisfying, and in some ways more satisfying than some more successful events that I did. Like I said before, with EF Language, hey, I mean, if you get 2 boats at the outset, you have plenty of money, you can train, you have 2 teams, you know, you should be pretty good. And we were, and we won. But when the hill is super, I would say the measure of your satisfaction is directly relative to the steepness of the hill that you climb.
Speaking of which,
that you overcome.
So in '85, Tommy says to me one time, so listen, the crew is getting rowdy. The boat isn't done yet. I got to get somebody to really kind of organize the crew and keep them together. Paul, what do you think? And we both laughed. You were young, but it was obvious you should be really the crew chief, tactician and crew chief. And so then we get the boat done, and then, you know, as everybody who's watching this may know, US 61 was the first bow rudder boat ever. We'd driven a prototype of it, a Soling prototype of it. But there you were steering the first bow rudder boat anytime. And although Tom was driving it, tell people what it was like at the beginning of steering the first bow rudder boat ever.
Well, the very first times we sailed it, I mean, it was uncontrollable. You know, the thing would tack when, you know, we didn't know which way to put we had been told, but I think between not being sure what to do and how much, you know, put some bow rudder in. Well, you know, what does that mean? 4 degrees, 8 degrees, 12 degrees. And then the actual mechanics of the linkage between the forward rudder and the back rudder and the ratio between them. As you remember, there was the cyclic and the collective. Different contraptions down in the bilge. And I mean, that was a real tough exercise. And yeah, we were, even in the first round robin, still down in Perth, we were barely under control, I would say, most of the time. We even had times when we didn't know what to do. We would disconnect the forward rudder from the whole machinery down inside the boat if we thought the machine was getting out of control, the Cyclops, and we would just pin it. You know, Tom would say, just pin it at 6 degrees, just pin it. And then that thing would be stuck at 6 degrees, and then you'd steer with the back rudder as best you could, with that thing basically just being fixed. So, you know, but then we refined it. Kenny Keefe did a huge, amazing job of leading the team. We did have Phil Keiko. We had a pretty good little technical team. Gary Mall was the main architect, but at that point, the boat had gotten really beyond Gary Mall. It was an aircraft project. And, you know, you had Heiner Meldner in there, you had Alberto Calderon with all these highfalutin ideas, which were probably right, but then trying to execute that on a sailboat, bouncing around in 30 knots of wind and, you know, 6 or 7 foot seas and in Fremantle, you know, it is somewhat miraculous that we finished 3rd in that Louis Vuitton Cup and, you know, made the semifinals. And, you know, Tom's charisma and then just the solidarity of the team. It's the same thing we had at America One. People weren't there for the money. People were there to be a part of it and be a part of the team. And again, in '86, you know, it was all St. Francis Yacht Club. It was this club's first opportunity to race in the Cup. The club got behind it. In a lot of ways, you and, you know, Bob Scott and quote unquote, the boys at the bar started the whole thing. And then a guy named Bob Cole entered the scene, and he did yeoman's work to, you know, help us get to the finish line. And those were the days when really the clubs made a difference in the America's Cup. And I think
St. Francis was the first club. We tithed everybody $30 a month, and it was the first time that a yacht club's members voted to support an America's Cup effort. It wasn't just one guy at the bar writing a check. And that was a big deal. That vote came through. About 3 people said no. to the deal, and we all had to talk to them. But it was a big meeting, and Dean Morrison asked to bat cleanup at that meeting, and he said,
"Who did Dean Morrison?"
Dean Morrison batted cleanup. He came up and said, "Well, I want to bat cleanup. I want to be the last guy to speak." And as you and I know, he was in his 70s at the time, and we thought that he wants to bat cleanup. Oh, what about Blackaller? What about you? What about anybody else? He said he wanted to, and it was an amazing thing. He basically used words we can't use in a family broadcast, as he told the members assembled, a couple hundred. He said, "The America's Cup boat race is the biggest thing in sport. And you walk into our front door, what's it say on the sign? St. Francis Yacht Club. And the biggest yacht race is the America's Cup. So we're going to be in the biggest yacht race because we're all going to fund it."
Yeah. They just don't make them like, I mean, who's the Dean Morrison of today? I mean, where did these characters go? Where did Denny Jordan go? Where did, Dean Morrison? Now there's a character.
Coughlin for the boat. Coughlin, remember the boat Coughlin. So talk about hard sailing venues, tough venues to figure out. You sailed in all the great venues of the planet.
Athens was tough. I had a hard time. Athens was tough when the wind would get light. It was very hilly around Athens, and you could get winds from a couple different quadrants. It seemed almost no rhyme or reason. That was a tough one. And I was just thinking about something else recently that's very difficult. Lake Garda is one of the easiest places. Really, it's just a wind tunnel, and the wind comes one way and it goes the other way, and you always go to the rocks, and it's all geographical. Anyway, I think for people who don't know the Bay, San Francisco Bay, is tricky if you're, with the current. And I always had a huge advantage when we used to race like the Calvin Page or, any kind of an event on the city front. Tom and myself, we were always having a good advantage out of that over Buchan and Vince and Reynolds. The Solent is a very tricky place to sail. So the first time you go to England, and in the old days we used to race in the Admiral's Cup, that is maybe the Bay times 2 in terms of trickiness. It's, but there are some, lakes are always tough. I hadn't sailed on lakes in a long time, and now I sail every year on Gull Lake, and that's just random. 30-degree wind shifts are just the norm, and it takes a whole different mindset to figure out, how close to a ley line to go or not when you're potentially dealing with 30-degree wind shifts. So, but it's all even. One thing about that is it's equal to all competitors, right, at the 5-minute gun. So memorable moments in your career. In December '86, in the first race of the semis, USA versus Stars and Stripes, you're leading at the first weather mark. Port Rounding. You guys are about a length and a half ahead. Tommy leans over his shoulder. Remember what he says, and to whom? Yeah. So I guess in the boat, the tactician and the navigator were behind the helmsman, right? So Healy and I were behind Tom doing the runners, and we jibe set up there. So we had just obviously been dealing with the runners. And we jibe set, boom, the kite fills, and we're off. And we're only 2 lengths ahead of Stars and Stripes. First race of the head-to-head competition grudge match. And Tommy turns around and goes, "Bye-bye, Dennis." And I just said, "Don't ever say that. That's just the worst thing to say." And I think it was, obviously his boat versus our boat, but it's a little bit like if you've watched the Jordan special the last few weeks, right?
Yeah.
All a really good athlete needs is a little motivation to put their A game on the table if it wasn't already on the table. I don't want to wake the sleeping giant. So that was Tom. He had, you know him better or as well as I did. He wasn't long on patience. So in his mind, it was over. That was it. We only needed to go up 1 beat.
As I recall, that was the last time we were ahead in all 4 races.
For sure. Dennis had the machine. Obviously, we saw what happened against New Zealand, and then what happened against Kookaburra. I mean, that thing was a sled. It was 2 feet longer than any other 12 meter. It probably weighed 2,000 pounds more. It had, 10 square meters less sail area. I mean,
you're the doctor, Fremantle. You don't need sail area.
In fact, you want to get rid of it. I think we probably all ended up racing with less than our allowable sail area, right? Because it was just flapping in the breeze. So you took that shit down.
Okay, so flash round. 1-word answers about Lowell North. 1-word answer.
Genius.
Don Trask.
It's 2 words, but solid citizen.
Tom Blackaller.
Wild hair.
Dennis Surtees.
Competitive.
Packy Davis.
Generous.
Kenny Keefe.
Extremely comprehensive. Thorough. Let's just put thorough.
Bob Billingham.
Workaholic.
Rod Davis.
Talent.
Dennis Conner.
Relentless attention to detail.
Russ Silvestri.
Extreme talent and passion.
Fritz Jewett.
Generous team player.
Russell Coots.
Brilliant.
Raul Gardini.
Visionary.
Gary Mull.
Gary Mull was good old boy.
Juan Carlos.
He's a good man. He's a good man. He's in a high position, but you could tell he was down to earth.
Your mom.
Herman?
Your mother.
Sweetest person on the planet.
Your dad.
Second sweetest person on the planet.
Paul Cayard, congratulations once again for being the first sailor inducted to the San Francisco Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame. It's been our pleasure to have you as a guest on the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon virtual view. And you've done just a masterful job as chairman of the board this year in what many have to consider to be one of our tough years. Nobody would have guessed when we picked a gifted person to be chairman that we'd put you to such amazing service. Thanks for what looks like almost a full-time job. I know the number of hours that you've been putting in leading the club through this, and you're doing a great job at it. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thanks, Ron, and thank you all. Happy Memorial Day.